Okay, Tov. Today's daf is daf Ayin Hey and Zbachim as we learn. For Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Nesuim Matzar V'Shivya, and we learn for Moshe Yaakov Ben Chana Sheva for Refuah Shlema.
And Chaim Yehuda.
Chaim Yehuda.
Tzvi Dov and Chaim Yehuda.
The yard site of Tzvi Dov and Chaim Yehuda. Not Refuah Shlema. The yard site of Tzvi Dov and Chaim Yehuda, Sham, whose yard site is today. So Michael will be exiting early so he can put his towels and tefillin on and be ready before the other guy grabs it. Okay, good. All right, so the Mishnah said back on Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, we're talking about animals that got mixed up, right? If you got a bad animal that got mixed up with some good ones. And we talked about, what about kachim b'kachim? What happens if two different animals got mixed up and they're both the same kind of carbon? Let's say they both need an ola, both need a shlam, whatever the carbon was, they both got mixed up. What do? So it says very simple. The Kohen brings it. I'm bringing this one for whoever it belongs to. I'm bringing that one for whoever it belongs to. Both karbanos are good. We're not talking about bad karbanos here. We're just talking about good karbanos, but they got mixed up. Two guys had to bring the same one. They each had to bring an ola, or they each had to bring shlamim. So you bring this one l'shem mishu. The Gemara asks a very simple question. Boy smicha. Most karbanos, not all, but most karbanos need smicha v'ba'am. Not if it's a carbon sibur, but if it's a carbon yachid, they need smicha, the owner. But while the animal's still alive, before the shechita, the owner has to press his hands down on the head of the animal. But boy smicha, Amar B'Yosef, but carbon nashim. We're not talking about karbanos of men. We're talking about karbanos of women. Mostly that's birds, not always, but sometimes so it's birds. Okay, women don't make smicha. They're excluded. Okay. Carbon nashim low, but we're not talking about carbon nashim at all. Eisvei, Abaye. Now we're going to try to show that even when it comes to karbanos of men, sometimes they don't do the smicha, and if they don't do the smicha, they carry on anyway. In other words, in our Mishnah says it's mashma that based on what we just said is that if it was a carbon of a man and you couldn't do smicha, we couldn't proceed. You have to, wait them, get a mum again, wait till they get a mum, and then exchange them, etc., etc. Okay, here's a case. A carbon of an individual got mixed up with a carbon of another individual. A carbon sibur shenasar, carbon sibur. Or a carbon sibur that got mixed up with another carbon sibur. Or carbon yachad, a carbon sibur, or the carbon yachad and a carbon sibur. Shenis arvu zebazed, they got mixed up. So what do? Now, it assumes at this point they got mixed up. And you carry on with the shechita, etc., because he tells you, what do you do in a case like that? Two different karbanos got mixed up, or a carbon yachad with a carbon sibur, a carbon yachad with a carbon yachad. Maybe you don't even know which one it is, right? We don't even know which one it is. Now, Rashi says, how can you mix up a carbon yachad with a carbon sibur? Well, using, for example, most carbon siburs are, let's say, chatos. A carbon sibur is always a male. Carbon sibur is always a male. Carbon yachid is usually a kizbar asir, which is a female. You can't mix them up. You can't mix up a male and a female. At least in the times of the Gemara, you couldn't. Right? You can't do that. So what's the answer is, let's say the carbon of a nasi, the president of the country, the king. He brings a zachar, also a male. So it could be his carbon got mixed up with carbon at sibur. Or an ola with an ola, right? You could have in a case like that. They both are bringing an ola. Ola is always an ola. Four-legged animal is always a zachar. So they got mixed up. So he tells you, how do you carry on? What do you do with the dam? Oh, it's mashma that the smicha you don't do, right? You don't know. You don't know what are you going to do? You're going to do. Well, here's the solution. Maybe if it's a carbon yachad with a carbon yachad, let them each do smicha on each animal. Why don't they do that? I don't know why they don't suggest that, right? Right? Maybe they asked that kasha. I don't know why. Maybe it's improper. You don't do it on somebody else's carbon. But in any case, it's mashma over here. They didn't do smicha. They got mixed up. Okay, so how do you do the dam? So he says, okay, no sen dalam matanos b'kol echad echad. Okay, the maximum number of zrikas of sprinklings that you do is on a chatas. Remember, chatas does the four corners. So you do four from each one of them. You do four for each one of them, even if one is a we're assuming over here carbon yachal and carbon sibur, both chatos or both ola, so you know how many it is. But let's just say one's a chatos, one's an ola. So you do more. So you do 4 on each one. You do 4 of each one, mikol echad echad, on each corner. Now we're talking about here the 2 animals we're assuming got mixed up initially. We don't know which one's which. Okay, so being each one, let's say the truth is, if you don't know, we're talking about where it's min b'mino, where it's the same animal and it's the same ola or chatas. So because if one's a chatas, one's an ola, and you got them mixed up, the procedure is all different. The chatas you eat and the ola you don't eat. The chatas, the dam of a 4-legged animal, the dam is above, the ola is below. We're talking about min b'mino, where it's the same one, either a chatas with a chatas or an ola with an ola. So he says, so what you do is you do 4 matanas of each one, assuming that they're, say, both chatos. According to Beis Hillel, you remember, if you did 1 zrika, it's good enough at the end of the day. You need 4. But if you okay, Rashi's gear keeps this gear of nasan arba mikulan, meaning if you did them both together. And as if you did them both together, Rashi says it's shtaim shein arba, but that's according to Beis Shammai that you need 2 minimum by a chatas. So it's not clear what Rashi says when he says here arba matana shtaim matana shein arba, right? He says if you did if they were both olas, okay, then you do shtaim shein arba. When he says we have nasan arba mikulan, that means if you did it together, yatsa. Okay. Now, when is that? If they got mixed up while they were alive. In other words, before you started, presumably, you got them mixed up. So it's mashma that you carry on, you do the shchita. Okay, you don't know which one's which, so you do 4 matanas l'chetchila from each one. Or if you did one, if you mixed up the dam together, then you do 1 matana im nasan matana mikula, or if you did 1 matana from each one, then nasan arba mikula and yatsa. Mikula sounds like he did it together. In other words, if you mixed up the 2 bloods and then you did this rika on the 4, you also yotze that way too. But Rashi says that shtaim shein arba, not so clear when he says Rashi says im nasan matana mikula, and then he says arba matana shtaim matana shein arba. The Shita asks on him, that's according to Beis Shammai. The Shita brings down a different gear. He says, Inami im nasan shnaim mikulan. Maybe shnaim mikulan, meaning if you did 2, maybe 1. If the dam got mixed up together and you have 2 korbanos, so bring 1 for each one, or bring 2 for each one. But again, that sounds like Beis Shammai. Okay. In any case, that's what you do with the dam. But he says that's all one. The Medvar Mamurim says the Gemara they got mixed up while the animals were alive. But again, what are we getting at? We're getting at the kasha we just said before that a carbon that requires smicha that you can't do, you don't carry on. As we said, what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says you bring for each one for whoever it is, speaking about carbon of a woman that doesn't need smicha. But here, l'chara, we see that you don't need smicha even on those of a man, because a carbon sibur has to be that of a man, right? There's no such thing by carbon sibur as a carbon, right? If it's a carbon sibur, it's obviously for men. It's not just for women. You can't be just talking about carbon of a woman. We're talking about here carbon of men. But let's say there's a medvar they were mixed up in there. But let's say they got mixed up after they were slaughtered. You slaughter them properly, and then the dam get mixed up. So nosin arba matanas mikulan, right? So then, and now presumably the dam is mixed up together. Right, as you put all the dam in one kos. In other words, after you did shchita on each one properly, the dam got all mixed up in one receptacle. So you do arba matanas for all of them. Or you do markos from the whole thing together. Also because at the end of the day, even the fechatas, according to Beis Hillel, you only need 1 dam, 1 zrikas dam. So if the dam is all mixed up together, you have 2 karbanos over here, and all the dam is in 1 cup. If you do 1 zrika, that suffices for both. Okay, that's part of the brisa. Rebbe says no. It depends. Well, is there enough blood in there in that 1 zrika to fulfill the obligation for both the animals? If there's enough in that 1 zrika for a zrika for both animals, meaning what do we mean by that? 1 zrika that goes, let's presumably on 2 walls. If there's enough, he says it's 1 zrika is only enough if there's enough blood and that's rika to suffice for 2 different animals. Okay. Ktani yachid domirat tzibur. Now we said there if a yachid and a tzibur, let's say carbon, two korbanos of a yachid, two individual people got their korbanos mixed up, or a carbon of yachid with a carbon of sibur. Mat sibur gavri, just like a sibur is for men, includes men, obviously. Af yachid also, we're speaking about gavri, we're talking about for men, not for korbanos of a woman. And what do you see over here? What do you see? That if the animals got mixed up, you proceed. The question is, how do you do the dam, right? You do 4 for each, or if they got mixed up together, you could do one zrika for both of them if there's enough blood there, etc. But what do you see? Apparently, there's no smicha there. So why do you say you need smicha? We said you don't need smicha. In other words, our Mishnah says the two korbanos got mixed up. You just bring the coin, says, I'm bringing this one for whoever it belongs to, and I'm bringing that one for whoever it belongs to. What do you mean? What about the smicha? They can't do smicha if they don't know whose it is. They don't know whose carbon it is. So the answer is, okay, that's speaking about the korbanos of a woman. But korbanos of a man don't require smicha. They do. And here you see, don't they require smicha? Here, you're saying they do require smicha, but this brisa shows apparently they don't require smicha. If they got two mixed up, what do? Okay, you sprinkle the dam for both of them together, however you do it. 4 zrikas, 2 zrikas, 1 zrika, but it's mashmid into smicha. Amarava, v'tizbara, I'll ask you kasha. Hamatash, does this brisa make sense anyway? The Tani says, it says, that's only if they got mixed up while they're alive. But if they got mixed up after they were slaughtered, the dam got mixed up, then it's different, right? Then it's different. Then what do we say? What do you mean? Mali chayim, mali shchutin. What's the difference? The shrikas. What's the difference if you mix them up when they're alive, or mix them when they're after they're slaughtered already? They both would have the same halacha. Says Rashi, right? Says Rashi, Hi chayin, with his barachim, do you think chayin is that they're really alive here? When it's about a sarv kol smicha, they got mixed up before you did smicha koi. Haktani av shchuten lo boy dalid. Shchuten don mikol echad lechet chila uveshchuten nami mishkachas le the boy kagon shesarv bekosis. In other words, the beginning we said if they got mixed up, you give 4 matanas from each and every one lechet chila. Okay, if you did one from each one, it's also okay. And if they mixed up together, it's okay. But if you mix them up after they were already slaughtered, you mixed up the dam. The Brisa said, you give all 4 together, meaning you don't do for each one. What's the difference? If it's chai or if it's shchuten or it's not shchuten, you should have 4 zrikas for each one. That's what Rashi explains. It's the boy could go because how would that be? But even shchuten, it's also the same. Let's say you mixed up the different cups, right? What do we say? There's three possibilities here. You got them mixed up. All the animals were not slaughtered yet while they were alive. You got them mixed up after you slaughtered them, and each one was in its own cup, the dam's cup, or it's mixed up, or they mixed up when both bloods were mixed up in one cup together. Why don't you say also, why do you say that? That's only if they're alive, but if they were shchuten already, then you do 1 zrika for all of them. What do you mean? Even if it's shchuten, it's also possible that they mixed up the 2 different cups. I had a cup of the blood of animal number 1 and the cup of blood of animal number 2, and we got mixed up. We don't know which one's which. And there also you would need lechatchila 4 zrikas from each one of those cups. So that's what he said back in the Gemara. Does it make sense? You could have the possibility of the animals being mixed up while they're alive. You don't know which animal's which, or after they were slaughtered already. You just don't know which cup of dam belongs to each one. That could also be. So why do you say that if it's shchuten, then you just do 1 for everything ready together? No, it's possible they were slaughtered. And each cup was, the 2 cups were mixed up. You don't know which cup is which. Elohichomer. So you know what? That's not what the Brisa means. The Brisa doesn't make sense the way it reads, that it's simply either number 1 or number 3. 3 possibilities that I told you. Number 1, mix up while they're alive. Number 2, mix the 2 cups were mixed up. You don't know which one's which. And the third one, that the cups are mixed up together, that it's all, the dam is all together. Why did you only possibility of number 1 and number 3? You have a possibility of number 1 and number 2. Elohichomer. The medvom, this is what the Brisa must mean. The medvom when they were slaughtered, when they were mixed up after they were slaughtered, like when they're alive, meaning bekosos. You have possibilities number 2 and 3. You have possibility that they were mixed up after they were slaughtered. The 2 cups of dam were mixed up, right? Aval babolo, but when you mixed up in the same, you mix the 2 cups together of blood, then nosen dalaras vetulan. Then the blood is all mixed up in 1 cup anyway. All you have is one big mixture of blood. So then you give matanos from that 1 cup for both animals. And that's matanachas mikula also yatsa. That's how you have to learn the brisa. So therefore, what are we talking about? We're not talking about a case where you avoided smicha. We're talking about a case where you did smicha on both animals. In other words, again, we're holding the idea that animals that are brought on behalf of men, including tzibor, which is men, right? Which is men, certainly includes men and women, right? But includes men, requires smicha. Of course, tzibur doesn't need smicha. The carbon of a tzibur doesn't need smicha, but we're talking about carbonus of a yachid, like that of a tzibur, just like a tzibur is, we said, is speaking about a carbon of for men. So here the carbonus of yachid also we're speaking about for men. Did you avoid the smicha? No, you did smicha. They got mixed up afterwards. The Bryce is talking about 2 cases. One where I mixed up the 2 cups of blood from the 2 different animals after they were slaughtered. I don't know which one's which. And the second case is where the blood actually got mixed up together, the 2 different cups mixed up together, possibly it's number 2 and number 3. But smicha was done. Who says this Bryce is not talking about a case where there's no smicha? For a carbon of a yachid that requires smicha, you have to have smicha, otherwise you don't proceed. Okay. Rebbe Omer, now this is like an Omer Ma. Rebbe said, wait a minute. You're saying that if the blood was all mixed up together, right? All in 1 cup, 1 zrik is good enough. Rebbe says that's only if there's enough in your 1 zrik and the 1 sprinkling, there's enough for 2 animals. If there was only like a drop that was good enough for 1 animal, then it's no good. Says the Gemara, the Rebbe Haisvar, does Rebbe hold to this? Vatanya, we learn, we're going to see this later on. Daf Pei. Amar Rebbe, the Diver Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer is talking about a case like this. Mei chatos, the paraduma water, right? You can mix up, right? That's already there. You have to be sprinkled on people who are sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day after they became tamei meis, after they went to a funeral, right? And then the 7th day they go to the mikveh. So what about that mei chatos? Got to be sprinkled by the kohen on the person who's tamei. Right? So it says over there, what happens if other, let's call tap water, got mixed up with that water? Tap water got mixed up. So Rabbi Lezer says you do two azos. You do 2 when it's kosher, it doesn't ruin it, but you got to do 2 azos. Like more over there debates why do you need 2? Why do you need 2? If you say what yesh bila that the regular, the non-sacred water, the tap water we'll call it, the tap water and the chatos water get mixed up properly, even as the water is evenly distributed. So 1 should be enough. So the Gemara debates over there. Maybe he holds that you don't need a minimum quantity. Any amount is good for the azah over there. As long, in other words, there's no fixed quantity. There's definitely a fixed quantity when you prepare the water, right? In the klicheres on mayim chayim that it says you have. But when the kohen takes it in his hand, there's no minimum quantity there. The Gemara makes that. Any amount. You don't need any fixed amount. So why do you need 2? Why do you have to do it twice? The more debates over there, one far is that it's a knas, that he shouldn't come to do this on purpose, etc., etc. The Gemara made sense. It said if you need a minimum quantity, maybe that's why you need 2, because you're afraid 1 handful it's evenly distributed between kosher water and tap water, right? So if it's evenly distributed and you take a handful and the kohen takes a handful of water and you need that minimum, you got to do it twice because each handful only holds half the amount of holy water that he needs. Okay, so the Gemara debates with Shapiro. Rebbe said, according to Rebbe Lezer, hazah, any amount is matar. Hazah ain't tzricha shiur, doesn't need a particular amount. And hazah machzah kosher machzah posel is also okay, even if half the water is good and half the water is not good. So what do you see over here? The Rebbe says, according to Rebbe Lezer, you don't need a minimal amount when it comes to the mechatas water. Whatever fits into his hand is good enough. Whatever he takes in his hand is good enough. So you don't need a minimum amount. Why do you say over here that if there's enough dam for both carbonos, then it's okay. But if the sprinkling was not enough, so you're going to say that's water. This is dam, right? Wait. Let's see what the Gemara says. So one answer is He was only speaking according to Rabbi Lezer. Over there, it's Rabbi Lezer Shita. The Chachamim say that if tap water got mixed up with the Mechadas water, it's all puzzle. You got to throw it out. No good. Rabbi Lezer says it's okay. So he says, according to Rabbi Lezer, any amount is okay, and a puzzle amount of water that tap water got mixed up doesn't ruin it. And any amount is okay. That's he's explaining according to Lezer, but he doesn't hold that way. What are you talking about? How are you comparing the sprinkling of the mechatos water to the sprinkling or the putting of the dam on the mizbeach? If we're talking about two chatos over here, it's actually not sprinkling. Remember, the Kohen does it with his hand. He what is it? What's the word? He smears it on the mizbeach, right? So those are two different things. When it comes to smearing, you need enough for each carbon. When it comes to sprinkling of the chatos water, then you don't need a fixed amount.
Where do we shear for either of them?
For either what? For dam? No.
Dam or for
Okay.
water?
Okay. For the water in a chanami, that's a machlokas, and we'll see. Hazor doesn't need any amount, doesn't it? It just has to whatever fits in his hand. Whatever he puts in his hand is good enough. No shear. When it comes to the hazor of the dam, and see, it's a dam. Rashi explains, "Sarach shear sheira hadam l'shnei ruchos haken shemes." You got to be able to see the dam on two walls. Shtaim shenim. You got to be able to see when you smear it or when you sprinkle. You got to be able to see it on us. So that's the shear. Maybe one drop wouldn't suffice. You need some. And it's not a shear in terms of milliliters or whatever. It's a shear of being able to be seen on the two walls. Okay. So the Mishnah now said next case, then the last case that we're going to discuss in the Mishnah, or the last case of the mixing up. Let's say animals got mixed up with a bechor animal or a meiser animal. The problem over there is bechor and maser animals are not allowed to be redeemed. It's not like you can let them get a mum and then you redeem them. So what do you do? So what do you do with the good animals? Let's say the kachim animals. Let's say a chatos got mixed up with a bechor and a meiser. So you let them all get a mum and you have to eat them. A bechor and a meiser are eaten. Bechor is eaten by the Kohen. Meiser is eaten in Shalim. In other words, you got a meiser behemoth eating Shalim. So you have to deal with that way. So the Gemara now is going to go off on a little bit of a tangent about bechor meiser. Amar Rami Marchama. Bechor lebeishami. Beishami holds now. There's a discussion. Bechor, if you have a bechor animal, you have to give it to the Kohen. He brings it to Beis Mikdash. Shech said he's the only one who eats it, right? Him and his family, like the last Mishnah in Ezo Makoman says. What happens if it gets a mum? So there's a machlokas if he can get anybody could eat it or whatever. Beis Shammai holds that even if it gets a mum, it has to be eaten by people who are tahor. So let's say you have a bechor today. Today you could have a bechor. You're a farmer and you have a bechor. Even if it has a mum, ein machil nida. So you don't give it to a nida who's tamei because it has to be eaten by kosher by people who are pure, who are not tamei even today, right? If we are tamei, we can't eat it. So that's what Beis Shammai holds. So he says a bechor leBeis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai, that you have to eat it in the state of Tara. You can't give it to a nida. So if the Kohen's wife is a nida, can't give it to her. Tmurasama. What happens if you make a tmur? You say animal B should be like A, and A is your bechor. What do you say there? Bechor eino nifta. A bechor you can't be poda. You can't change it for money, even if it gets a mum. Tmurasama. What about the tmura? What about if you make a tmur? Could that be exchanged for money? Bechor and nishkal belitra. A bechor is not allowed to be sold in the market. In other words, it's not weighed by the pound and sold because it's a bezoyon. So you don't do that. What about tmurasama? What about the tmura of a bechor? Amarava, Tanya, we learned bechor maser, mishahuma, bechor maser, that once they got a mum, osin tmura, they could still make a tmura, tmurasaki osabhen. So that's your answer. Even if it got a mum, mishahumamu, Rashi says, even if it got a mum, right? Even if it got a mum, af mishahumamu, even if it got a mum, it can make a tmura, and the tmura is like that. In other words, you can't sell it in the marketplace, etc. You can't be poded. Boy, Ramacham, ask this question. Hit this bechor lebek. Let's say you have a bechor bal mum, has a mum, and the Kohen decides to give it to the Bedek Abayis. He dedicates it to the Bedek Abayis Mao. What do you say there? Mao, sheyishka belitra, ravcha the hekdesh adif, odilma zilus the bechor adif. The rabbi said you're not allowed to, so it's machlokas, Rashi and Toast over here, whether it's the Raisa or not, Rashi and the Shita, whether it's the Raisa or not, the Isser of weighing it in the market, in other words, selling it in the marketplace. So let's say, though, generally, if a carbon belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, we do sell it because Beis Hamikdash can make more money that way. So we do it. But when it comes to Bechor, which normally belongs to the Kohen, we say you're not allowed to sell it in the marketplace. You can't redeem it or sell it in the marketplace because It's only his profit, and it's a bizayon to sell things in the to sell a carbon in the marketplace. So because of that, we say better that he's not allowed to sell in the marketplace because the profit would only be to him. So in other words, we're comparing the shame of Hegdish, the bizayon of Hegdish, that it's improper to sell their animals in the marketplace. But if the Beis Hamikdash can gain by it, and a regular carbon, we do sell it in the marketplace. You get a moment, you sell it, and with the money, you buy another carbon. Fine. So that's when it comes to regular carbonas. But a bechor, we don't allow him to sell it. But what about if he gave the bechor balmum to Bedek Abayas? So you have two conflicting ideas. Number one, it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, and maybe therefore you should be able to sell it in the marketplace. On the other hand, it's still technically it's a bechor, and therefore it's the profit is not him, but it's still it's a design for the bechor. What do you say? Do you say that the profit that Beis Hamikdash makes is more stronger, and therefore you could sell it, or do you say no, it's still a bechor, and we don't want to embarrass or shame the idea of the carbon bechor? Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida, Tashma bring a proof mir. Nesavra bechor meiser. The animals over here. Let's say you had a chatas or a shlom got mixed up with the bechor meiser. In our Mishnah, got mixed up with bechor meiser. Bechor meiser cannot be transferred, cannot be redeemed, cannot be sold. Therefore, what do you do? You wait till they get a mum and you eat them the way they are. You eat them the way they are. You can't bring them as come. You eat the way they are with the chumras of bechor and meiser. You write shistava b'yochlu bechor k'meiser. Lav l'mem doesn't mean to say that ain't an ishkal b'litra. You can't sell it. That means that you can't sell it in the marketplace. Is that your answer? So Rav Huna Rav Chizkiah Tamida the Rav Yirmi they said no. Midami, how can you compare it to that case? Hasam shtei kedusha shtei gufin. There you're talking about two different animals. You're talking about you have a bechor. Let's say got mixed up with a shlomim, right? So what do? You can't wait till they get a mum and then sell the bechor. Right, so you sell the bechor. So you eat it the way bechor is eaten. It's only eaten in by kohanim because you don't know which one's the bechor. Only by kohanim and their families. Only eaten in Yerushalayim. Well, all the animals would be eaten in Yerushalayim. Bechor could be eaten in Yerushalayim too. But you eat it like a chomer sheben. Okay, you eat it like the bechor. So but it's two different kedushas. One's let's say a chatos, one's a bechor, one's a shlamim, one's a bechor. So they're two different kedushas. The shnei gufin, they're two different animals, two different kedushas. And two different animals. Hachosh kedushas here. There's two kedushas, bechor and bedek abayis, but it's the same animal. The same animal. So maybe over here you could sell. Maybe over here would be different. We say you could sell it in the marketplace. Maskal Yossi Baravan Ma'ilu Amar Haftuli bechor shetisel bedek abayis. A bechor that he gave bedek abayis. Could he say you could be poted for me? Klum shamalo. Do we listen to it? In other words, why do you think that there's a havamina that you should be able to sell it in the marketplace? If a man says, be poted for me, the Torah says, lo yipadeh, you can't redeem a bechor no matter what. So haftu, Rachman HaMalav Tav Gemara says, no. Haftu, if you redeem it, the Torah says you can't redeem it. But El Rav Ami, the question was this, klum hiknezeh elamasha kanulo. He had no ability, the Kohen had no ability to redeem it or sell it in the marketplace. So when he gave it to Bedek Abayis, all he gave was that power. He gave the power of owning the animal, but not being able to sell it in the marketplace or redeem it. And that's the answer that you can't, it still maintains its kedushas bechor in that sense. Now, the last words of the Mishnah were that all animals, all karbonos can be confused, can be intermingled and confused, meaning if I have an ola and let's say a shlamim, could they be mixed up? Yeah. I could have an ola and a shlam, they could be mixed up. They could both be male. Right, could both be males. We're talking about four-legged animals. Remember, four-legged animals. When it comes to birds, there's no Thomas V'zichus when it comes to birds. Okay, but the Mishnah said, "Hakol yichol n'sarav chutz michatus v'osham." Why? Osham is a ram. Is always a ram. A ram is a male. A male, right? A male is male, and a chatos is a kisbo or a seira. So one's male, one's female. So a chatos can never be mixed up with an osham. Chatos can never be mixed up with an osham. Everything else can be mixed up. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna chatos v'osham." The high zochar by nekeva, one's male, one's female. Chatos v'olanami, chatos v'olanami. Chatos ola cannot be mixed up because an ola is always a male. Why do you say chatos and osham? A chatos and an ola can also never be mixed up because chatos is a female and ola is a male. The Gemara's answer is ikasoyer nasi. Ah, no. You have the chatos of a nasi. Chatas of a nasi, we said, is a sa'ir, which is a male too. So therefore, in theory, they could be mixed up. The chatos, you're right, a regular chatos of a commoner, but a chatos in theory, a chatos of a sawyer, of a nasi, the president of the country, the king, that could be mixed up with an ola. So it is possibly mixed up. Now you have to put in the girsa on the side of the Gemara, brings it down in the Shita also, I think, right? Yeah, the Shita also brings down the girsa, and I can go more detailed. If the fourth line at the bottom of the page in the small letters says hi Zachav is Ika Sar Nasi. So the Gemara is not Chatas v'Asham also Nami Ika Sa'ir Nasi, right? Chatas and Asham, what do we say? The Mishnah says everything can be mixed up except a chatos and asham. You can never mix up a chatos and asham. Wait a minute. Chatos and asham could also be mixed up. You just said the chatos could be a sa'ir of a nasi. That's a male. And an asham is a male. So you could mix them up. So again, the Gemara now says it right. So you have to put those words in. Asham nami ika sa'ir nasi. Asham also you can say you have the sa'ir nasi. Chatos v'asham also you have the sa'ir of a nasi, which is a chatos, and an asham, which is a male. They're both male. The answer is high seor b'hai tzemach, high tzemer. In other words, the asham is a male ram. A male, what is a ram? A ram is an adult lamb, sheep. They have wool on them, right? They have shearings, right? They have wool on them. So that's got wool on them. Whereas the sawyer of a nasi is a goat. A goat's got a few strands of hair, right? He's got a little hair, but he doesn't have fleece is the word I'm looking for, right? He doesn't have fleece. So there's a difference between them. You can't mix up a goat with a ram. Everybody can, even though they're both male, but one has fleece, one has hair. So then you wouldn't mix them up. The only ones you would mix up. So the Gemara then says, so Pesach v'Asham nami lomar. So Pesach and an Asham also can't be mixed up. Hi ben shana, hi ben shtei shanim. A Pesach has to be within its 1 year. Once it's a year old, it's no good. Comes a shlom then. Asham is 2 years old. So Ika Asham Nazir, Ika Masora. No, there's an Asham of a Nazir and Asham Masora, which are also only 1 year old, right? By some more, you could say, Ika ben Shana, the Mechsika ben Shtei Shanim, Ika ben Shtei Shanim, the Mechsika ben Shana. Like with human beings, you have people, you can't look at somebody and tell how old they are, because some people look older, some people look younger. So even if you have a Pesach, which is less than a year, and a Stam Asham is 2 years old, but they could still sometimes look alike. You can't tell which is one. So therefore, it's possible to mix up a chatos and an ola. It's possible to mix up a chatos, not a chatos with an asham, because one's got hair, one's got fleece. It's possible to mix up everything except for an asham and a chatos. Asham and a chatos, because an asham and a chatos, if it's a chatos, which is a female, then obviously you're not going to mix up a male and a female. And even if the chatos is that of a nasi, then it's a sawyer. And a goat and a ram are not, even commoners like us could tell the difference between a ram and a goat. Says the Mishnah. Asham Shlom. Let's say you mixed up an Asham. Remember, Shlomim could be brought from male or female. Shlom can be, of course, except for Shalmei Tzibur, because all Kabbalah Tziburs are males. But Asham mixed up, Asham of an individual can get mixed up with an Asham of a Shlom, with a Shlom, rather. Asham can mix up with a Shlomim. So what do you do there if the two animals got mixed up, right? You don't know which one, you don't know which one's the Shlom, you don't know which one's the Asham. Two different people over here. Or even if it's the same person, it's not a question of smicha, but it's a question of how do you bring them? One's kachim kachim, one's kachim kalam. Reb Shimon Omer Shneim Yishchtu B'Tzafim. Very simple. Okay, shech them both in the north, in case it's an asham, right? So the shlom can be shechted anywhere in the Azara. The asham has to be in the north. Okay, so you have an asham and a shlom. You don't know which one's which, and we're assuming now that the problem is not the smicha, right? That's not a problem. Let's say it's the same owner, whatever. All right, so shech them both in the north, and eat them like the more stringent one. Now, what's the difference between asham and shlom in their eating? Asham is eaten for 1 day and a night. I'm just saying ezo makoma. We say it every day, 365 days a year, right? Asham is eaten 1 day and a night. Shlom is eaten for 2 days and a night, right? If you shecht it on Sunday, you can eat it Sunday night, and Monday. Okay, so you're being machmer, only because for an asham, the next morning, the second day, it's no sar. You can't eat it chayiv karas, right? So very simple. So just eat it for 1 day and a night. Very simple. What about the zrika sadam? They're both shtayim shein arba, right? So no problem over there. So just yochel chamishem. Amrlo, that's what Reb Shimon said. Amrlo, the rabbi said, no, Ein Levi and Kachman Beis Absul. What are you saying over here? If you bring the shlomim and let's say you didn't finish eating it in one day and a night, one of them is a shlomim, right? One of the kibbutz is a shlomim. So the asham, you're right, you ate it in a day and a night. The shlomim, you had some left over to the next day. It became nosar now. And you don't know which one it is, but obviously over here on the next day, let's say you shechted them both on Sunday morning. On Monday, you can't eat them anymore, right? You can't eat either one because maybe each one was an asham. You don't know. Okay, now you can't eat this. Now you're making this meat becomes puzzle. That's no good. Rather, what should you do? Well, do the standard procedure. Let them both get a mum and exchange them and redeem them and redeem them money and buy new karbanos with them. That's what the rabbi said. Because you can't bring kachim with day psul. You can't limit the time period for their eating. Because by limiting the time, if anything is left over, you're making that food into nosar, which it's not really. The shlam can be eaten the whole day on Monday. This is the second day. Okay. Let's say, though, they didn't get mixed up before you did the shechita. They got mixed up after you did the shechita. The meat's all mixed up. Kachim kalam. If it's kachim kalam, kachim kalam hanechon liyom echad benechon liyom. Let's say you mixed up kachim with kachim kalam, or kachim was eaten for 1 day versus kachim eaten for 2 days. Now you don't have an option anymore of waiting till they get a mum and exchanging them because now you've already shechted them. So what do? The meat, it's too late. The rabbis can't say now, it's too late already. You shechted them already. So if it's kachim and kachim kalam, so so number one, if it's kachim kalam, you have to eat them inside the azara, right? Because maybe it's kachim. Kachim kalam can eat anywhere in Yerushalayim. So, or you mixed up the yom echad, the nechon, the shnei yom, let's say a shlam is eaten for 2 days. A shlamim or a bechor or a mas or behema could be eaten for 2 days and a night, and the other one's going to be eaten 1 day and a night. So yochel kachamben, there's no thing. You have to eat it like the more stringent one. Eat it for 1 day and 1 night in the azara. Tani kamed durav. Tani learn in front of Rav the following halacha. Shvius ein lokem demea truma. Let's say you can't take with the money of shvius. Shvius have to be consumed all in that year. By the time the chayas in the field aren't eating anymore, it's got to be consumed. Okay. Can you buy with shvius money? Can you buy truma? Now truma has no limit on when it's eaten. You can give it to the truma, and if he could keep it in the yard for 5 or 10 years, he could eat that too. So you don't take shvuas money and ein loken b'dameh truma. You don't buy truma with shvius money. Okay, now we're talking about what do you truma? Talking about if you could sell the truma, let's say one coin to another. Why don't you do mishamat mechilasa? Because now you can't eat it because since it's shvius, is toe-face holds on to whatever you buy with the ready to exchange it for, then you have to finish eating it that year or whenever the chayas in the field stop eating that food, you can't eat it anymore. Okay, Amru Abana Kamei Rava. Hello, Reb Shimon doesn't go like Reb Shimon. The Reb Shimon, I remember being kosher based on psul. What did Reb Shimon say in our Mishnah? That even though one's a shlomim and one's an asham, you mix them up together. So you shecht it in the north and you eat it like a asham 1 day and a night. Even though some of the food that might be left over would become puzzle the next day. You could do that anyway. So this doesn't go like Reb Shimon. Because according to Reb Shimon, you're allowed to make kosher based on psul. Even though when you buy the truma with shmita money, you're going to possibly ruin it because at the end of Shemitah, you have to dispose of it. You can't keep the truma anymore because it was bought with shvius money. But Reb Shimon says you can. So he answered them. The rabbi said that before Rava or before Rabbah is the Gerson some. They said this doesn't go like Reb Shimon. Hard like Reb Shimon because Reb Shimon says you're allowed to bring kosher masul because even though the shlamim will be puzzle on the next day, go ahead and do it anyway. He says, no, if you tell Reb Shimon. When Reb Shimon said it's a locha b'di'evet, if they got mixed up, that's what you do. But l'chachila lo. But l'chachila, here you're talking about, can you take shvius money and buy truma with it? You're talking about l'chachila. L'chachila, he also agrees you shouldn't do that. Shouldn't mix up 2 karbanos and say, what the heck, I got a shlam and an ashma, just do it all the same way. And he can't do it l'chachila. He can't. He's just saying b'di'evet. He didn't say l'chachila. L'chachila lo. Says the Gemara. This will lead into tomorrow's Gemara. Even l'chachila, does he not say that? Isn't it possible to even l'chachila you could do that about Navi and Kashim Masul? That's tomorrow's Gemara. That's Daf Ayin Vav will be on the podcast, and on Sunday, Meretz Hashem, we'll start from the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Zayin. Shabbat shalom lekulam, refuah shlema to Kurt and to all those who need refuah shlema.